Thanks for tuning in to the Urban Scope podcast. I'm back with another random hip hop topic. I was thinking about this topic about a week ago about how impactful 2008 was for hip hop music. Now, 2008 had colossal releases from colossal and big time hip hop artists. So, this was around the time of my sophomore and junior years in college. Listened to great music, great times around this time. The genre had the best year, well, one of the best years. I want to say it was definitely the best year in the 2000s as far as releases goes. Of course, CDs were still out. Wasn't much streaming going on. There was still a lot of radio play. Sirius Satellite was, a smaller type thing, but the local radios were still major. And, you still had streaming in some aspects as far as like social media and stuff like that. But for the most part, it was pretty much albums like vinyls and physical CD sales. So you actually saw an artist's success or their impact. And another thing about 2008, I'll get into a little bit more, but we had a lot of things that happened as far as urban culture goes, and I'll get into that in a little bit when it comes in reference to Jeezy and Nas. But the classic albums that you have to think about in 2008, as far as hip hop, and I might left some off, but these are the highlights. So Lil Wayne's Carter 3, T.I.'s Paper Trail, Nas's Untitled, Rick Ross's Triller, Jeezy's The Recession, The Game's LAX, Kanye West's 808 and Heartbreaks, and Plies released two albums, Definition of a Real and The Realest, which he released two projects in the same year, less than 6 months, which is pretty impressive. A feat that not many artists get to do, but DMX has done it. Future's done it a couple times. It's not been done a lot, especially not successfully. Both of Plies albums went gold, I do believe, but every album that I mentioned, for the most part, went either gold or platinum. Some multi-platinum, and I'll get into that in just a little bit. But um, talking about the urban compact, the culture impact that 2008 had, you have to think about as well. We had our first ever black president and Barack Obama. I was in college around this time. I remember being in the dorm rooms and how everybody was so excited about it, about the change, no pun intended, and all the different things that we looked forward to, especially being alive. And my first time being able to vote was back in 2008. I had just turned 21 a couple of days prior, so I was eligible to vote, and I was able to vote for a black president my first time around. Historical, my grandparents couldn't say that. Most of our ancestors couldn't say that as well, especially in the black community. So that was a major time during this time period. And I remember my dad calling me and telling me, son, you can be anything that you want. And actually, it had more merit behind it now because of just the presidency and things like that. But not just because of the presidency, but just because of the progress we was making. It's a little bit going back now, but, back then we had a lot of hope. But that whole Jeezy's album, uh, The Recession, was dedicated to it was also a bad year financially because we was going through recession before the presidential election. So we had the recession going on, then we had the new election come in, and then also, uh, Jeezy dropped this whole album just based off having a black president, the possibility because it came out before the election, and then Jeezy also addressed the recession, which showed his maturity as a rapper. He wasn't just doing trap music; he was also doing uh, current events. So that showed his growth. Now, Lil Wayne, on the other hand, sold 1 million in the first week, 1 million copies, physical copies in the first week. Back in June of 2008, major changed the way people looked at sales. 50 Cent did as well, and I'll get into a topic about him in a later segment. But the impact when people started looking at the numbers, started looking at the sound scans, started looking at what people were doing first week. That's when first weeks became so major, even though, in my opinion, first weeks don't really matter because sometimes people catch on later. But it means a lot if you're an established artist, I guess. But if you're a new artist, it doesn't really mean much. Or if you have a niche market, like a smaller, like you're a conscious rapper or a backpack rapper or something like that, it's a lot different. But Lil Wayne put hip hop on the map, especially with the Lollipop single that was the lead single. It did a lot for music, and I remember walking to go get that album, and it was classic. Uh, There'll probably never be another Carter 3. just especially with the hype leading up to it, and we finally able to get to the product. It was amazing. So everybody knows that impact. T.I., his Paper Trail album, which is one of my favorite albums from him, it was his most socially aware album, and this was around the time that he was about to go into prison for the stuff that happened back then in 2008, and he was a lot remorseful and talking about trying to be positive and being more just aware of what he had done in his life and just being self-reflective. That whole piece of just not looking out the window, but looking in the mirror and seeing what I need to fix and what I could have done better. It was huge for his album and huge for the progress that he made as an artist. And, he dabbles in comedy and stuff now, but back then he was all hip hop all the time. And this album, Paper Trail album, was executedly flawless, especially with the pressure he had on him with the legal ramifications. 808s and Heartbreaks, Kanye showing another side. This is Kanye West, not Ye, the one that's doing the antics now. But him being able to create a subgenre of like emo rap, emo R&B. I wasn't a fan of Love Lockdown when it first came out, but I listened to the album. I became a fan of it because just the production and the lyrics that was placed to it. I don't know who wrote the songs, but they were amazing. So that was definitely something new and exciting to hip hop that I always try to stress. And I can't stress enough. The Game's LAX, with my favorite album from him. He just displayed an excellent rap performance, had a lot of guest appearances, but it didn't really matter. He still outshined most of those appearances, with the exception of maybe, DMX on the intros and skits and things like that doing the prayers. But this album also showed that he didn't need a 50 Cent or Dr. Dre cosign, and he solidified himself as one of the best writers in the game, not just as a rapper, but as a writer as well, just being able to be so creative and think outside the box and incorporate corporate current events into his raps. And he's one of the brilliant ones at that. Similar to what Chris Rock does in comedy, he incorporates current events and try to make a spin on them. The Game he has those same characteristics. Nas Untitled, which was my favorite album released that year, just because of the social awareness, the consciousness of it all. He had a song, My President is Black. He also had a song called America, which is one of my favorite songs. If you haven't heard that song, definitely check into it. But it's talking about everything from slavery all the way to now, and he puts everything in this beautiful bow and then presents it to you. And it was just a great album. And it's had so much. It didn't have a lot of commercial hits, but it had a lot of hits, and it was some of his best poetry next to Illmatic, and it was written, of course. Rick Ross's Triller as well. What can I say? He had that consistency, and he remained consistent on this album. I mean, with this album being put out, Plies put out the 2 great albums. He don't really have many features, but other than like female vocalists, but he got the job done, and this was his most productive and most efficient time of his career as well. So it was a great year for hip hop fans in 2008. And if you haven't heard of those albums, definitely do yourself a service and check those out. And until next time, I'll see you next time.